Well then, hello pirates and privateers, my name is TB Decayan, apparently according to chat, but rather spelled with an S, so you might think it was TB Skyen, but no, as chat have sussed out through detective work, my name is actually TB Decayan, and I've been lying to you all this time. So, it's time to be pirates in Legends of Runeterra, because pirates, good Bilgewater thing. Riot have released the new Rising Tides set for Legends of Runeterra, a game which I have sunk a distressing amount of time into, honestly. A lot more than I ever thought I would. And they've also been kind enough, apparently because I've made those other videos reviewing card art for Legends of Runeterra, they were kind enough to reach out and say, hey, this new set is coming up. Why don't we just give you enough wildcards to buy everything in the set, and then you can make some videos about it. So that's disclosure, as it says in the lower left corner of the screen. They did do that, but that's not going to stop me from complaining the way I always do anyway. So the way things are going to go is we're going to hit up the various cards inside Legends of Runeterra. We'll take a look at them, we'll analyze them, talk about them, how do they portray the characters, how do they work within their remit in order to portray a cool and interesting scene, what do they do with the character designs, oftentimes some very good stuff. Legends of Runeterra has character design that's way better than base League of Legends, in my opinion. And we'll do all of the new Bilgewater cards, of which there are a lot. And then we'll head through... Unfortunately, I've got a list of the new cards. We'll head through each of the regions, and we'll take a look at the new cards that were released for each one of them as well. So... super chats are available if you want to ask me any questions while we're doing this. You can also do that with donations on Streamlab. I'll try and keep up on them. I've got things popping up. I'm not an experienced streamer in terms of Streamlabs, so give me a second and I'll try and get to everyone in case anyone says anything. Or else just sit down and watch and listen to me ramble about pirates for... I don't know how many hours. It's probably not going to be as many as my... Originally, I did the stream where I reviewed every single card in the base game. That took a while. But I think with the only 120 cards that are being added to the new set, we should probably be good on not spending too long on this. And we'll start with, well, the one-cost elusive little bastard, Fizz, who is definitely going to be annoying me in all of my games. I play Poro decks. I don't want this. I can't deal with that. Anyway, so a lot of the illustrations and the work that's being done on Legends of Runeterra is being done by outside contractors working with Riot. In this case, this is an illustration by the studio 6 More Vodka, who were responsible for a huge number of the cards in the base game as well. There's also a couple of other studios who have contributed, as well as some internal artists at Riot themselves who have done some work in creating some illustrations. And there are some interesting differences, I think, in some places between the art styles of the base game and the art style of the expansion. It's not massive, but there seems to be tiny little shifts in a few things in terms of how they present the cards and the card art, which is probably just because the artists got better since all the work that they did on the original Legends of Runeterra. Anyway, Fizz. So something you'll remember if you watched the previous many hours of card analysis is that one way in which these cards tend to be constructed is there's a use of staging and framing in order to guide the eye and in order to highlight the important part of the picture. For example, Fizz, of course, being the main subject of the Fizz Champion card. And something I didn't talk very much about last time is that each card also, of course, the art has to be constructed in such a way that you can put it into this little, what is this, 9x16 frame of a card and still have the art work and be readable even without all the context of the scene around it. And so that's Fizz is kind of a good showcase for that, because look how he's framed against the ship. Now, Fizz's own colors, very saturated, he's very blue. He's a very cartoony, colorful character. And then look at the environment around him. We've got all this, fairly drab brown, lots of, it's a pirate ship. There's not a lot of color on there anyway, but you see all this shadow and shading, kind of keeping the pirate ship from being too bright and too colorful on its own. So we've only, in terms of the major colors here, we've only really got Fizz, and then the contrast with, of course, the oranges, which seems to be an ongoing meta-narrative in some of the Bilgewater cards, is oranges and what happens to them. In this instance, Fizz is messing with them, and they are unable to hit him because he's a bastard. So Fizz, with his bright blue colors, stands out from the brown, like mostly brown background, and he doesn't fade into the bright blue sky either, because the contrast is really strong. Because this is a very, very bright blue, this is a very dark blue, and that's also why the angle is the way it is. Imagine, for example, if Fizz had been framed, like, against the backdrop of this, like, dark, heavy wood back here. That has a much darker tone, and that would kind of make his little blue body, which is fairly dark, like highly saturated and fairly dark in contrast, fade into the background a little bit more. So having a lot of bright space behind Fizz helps frame him. Like, it helps draw the eye to him. It helps center him as the object of attention in the image. It's just also something that's helped by his trident, and like you can kind of see how between the barrel and the net and the sail, and then like the ship itself, the mast is the word I'm looking for. There is kind of this, like, you instinctively kind of know when you look at the picture that this stuff right here is not important. It's stuff like outside of the frame of the main action. So you don't focus on that. Your eye is drawn right here to the major character, and then from Fizz, you go to the other characters in the picture, which is also partly because the human eye is programmed to search for faces in everything. That's why you have the thing called pareidolia, where people will look at, like, a chair and see a face in it because it's got 2 holes and, like, a little scratchy line on it, things like that. But the human eye looks for faces, so the first face you look for, obviously, is Fizz, the biggest face. Then you kind of go to the pirates here in the background, and you kind of notice, oh, Fizz is jumping around and being a little shit, and knocking barrels over and getting shot at and laughing and having a great time because he's too stupid to understand what a menace he is. And then you go to the big dude here with the hand cannon and this Sagat-looking motherfucker here in the background ready to start a street fighter brawl. And then that kind of leads you finally to this character up here, who I don't know who that is. I don't know if they appear somewhere else in the set. It's entirely likely. But who seems to be some kind of leader because they are positioned, like, above the rest of them, looking down on them with his raised fist of command, which is the kind of framing that you often do for a character who's like an officer or a captain or someone who's in command of the troops down on the lower deck who are chasing Fizz around. So, besides, like, the obvious stuff of just, like, the little shit in the middle of the picture, you've also got, like, this little miniature story being told at this guy's like, get that little shit, I can't hit him, Captain. I'm Fizz. And then he's jumping around and doing things. And that's the thing I love about Legends of Runeterra cards, is they're so good at doing storytelling in their little panels so that the characters become more than just, oh, here's a cool mage who casts a spell, but there's something else going on. Oh, Jean-Lin Halen, I wanted to thank you for introducing me to Final Fantasy VII. It was very relaxing to play a feminine male who looked exactly like me in physicality. Thank you. Oh, you're very welcome. It's a very good game. Moving on to his evolved version, to his upgraded version, the way you really start to feel hateful and salty. And again, you can see the same thing is going on here. He's a little bit brighter here because he's out in the tropics in bright sunlight, but same thing going on. The water and the cliffs provide a kind of frame that sort of guides your eye to, okay, here's where the action is, here's where we want to be looking at. And then Fizz's higher contrast, like his darker colors compared to the sky, helps him stand out from the clouds in the background and the stuff that's going on there. But then there's additionally the little thing of the water here, the little barrier of the water, which then creates a different frame for, well, Longtooth down here, or as I like to call him, Bruce. Because I've watched Finding Nemo too many times, hanging out in the side of the frame, where, like, outside of the context of knowing that Fizz has some control over the shark, it kind of looks like the shark is eyeing him up for a meal, doesn't it? At least it does to me. And here's also an example of a particular angle. Like, in order to get the water barrier to sort of only, like, to not be, like, taking up half the screen or the bottom of the screen, but to taking up a corner, you do a Dutch angle. And a Dutch angle is when you, instead of having the camera align with the horizon, camera, I say, it's an illustration, but you get what I mean. You tilt it to one side or another side, which creates a feeling of instability in the viewer, especially in moving pictures, which here is grounded a little bit by the fact that the shark, like, if you rotated this picture so that the water line was even with the horizon, so that it was horizontal in the image, what you'd see is that Brucey here is actually kind of pointing downwards a little bit, but because our perspective is tilted, we are looking straight on at him, so he looks like he's kind of horizontal in the picture. And that grounds the image just a little bit, so it doesn't feel too wibbly-wobbly. But that chaotic sense of like instability is also good for Fizz, because that's his energy, that's his personality. He is an unstable character who like creates chaos in the environment everywhere he goes. You can see the same Dutch angle is being employed right here. We're not looking at this like straight on horizon flat to our eye line. We are at a Dutch angle as though he has just knocked us over almost. Which again helps give you that sense of the kind of person that he is, the kind of behavior that he has. Then we have Longtooth here. Or Brucey. Who gets his own card as well. Where what I like about it is like it's a very simple card. There's not a lot to say about it, but I do like the revelation that you get. Like here it's just, "Brah, I'm a shark!" popping out of the water, and then you actually look at it and it's like, oh, he's chasing these superbly ridiculous looking animals because he is endlessly and infinitely hungry. Here, there's much less of the framing thing going on. There's not that much of an environmental composition. Like, the water helps, like, create a space for him to dominate the picture by taking up, like, pretty much this entire area is dominated by him. It's under control by him, with these things clearly being driven out, fleeing away from him. Even another shark over here seems to be running away from him. And then another thing I love about Legends of Runeterra cards, they're not afraid to be ridiculous. Like, look at these stupid-looking fish make it look so dumb and overwhelmingly cartoony, and I like that, because, like, League of Legends, God love it, can often get too serious, I think. Like, it often takes itself a little bit too seriously, and I like it when they get cartoony and just, like, mess around with things, just because they can. So, moving on to my girl, my... Good lord, my thin-waisted girl, Miss Fortune, who has a really interesting base version of her splash, like especially compared to other champions. Let's try and see if we can find some champions to compare to. Like, you see someone like Braum, for example. See how he's framed in his version of a champion card. Like, he's dominant in the frame because, of course, he's the champion. He's the powerful guy, punching out a troll, having a great time, laughing. Same thing goes for a character like Fiora. She's very much the center of attention of her picture. Like, she's in control of the space. She's lit up. Her opponent is in shadow. Oftentimes, when they have champion cards, the champion is very much the focus, like the center of attention of the image. With Miss Fortune, the mood is a little bit different, because she's a relatively small figure in the image. In fact, her, like, whoever, Skimbleshanks, the pirate cat, whoever this may be, piloting the side of her ship, and the other characters, she's not really highlight or super in focus. She mostly gets space from being, like, hanging out over the edge of the boat, being contrasted against the background of the sky, and the composition kind of gives her space to breathe, but she's less overwhelmingly the focus of her base version, which is a very different story than, like, when she levels up. Then, undeniably, she's controlling the entirety of the space and everything is about her. But I do like the mood of this as a piece. Also because the version of Miss Fortune that they're using here is sort of, seems to be kind of an interesting halfway mix between the Miss Fortune that we have in-game and the Miss Fortune that that exists in the League of Legends lore. And I think there was a thing, let me see. Oh, Mr. Mine HD, this is my very first tip, and you are my first streamer that I want to watch live. My favorite card from the new set is Nautilus. What is yours? We'll get to mine, don't you worry. And thank you for the donation. What was I saying? Right, Miss Fortune. There's kind of two Miss Fortunes in League of Legends. There's the one that we have in-game, who is like big titty, lusty pirate maid flirting with everybody, who's literally one of her abilities is to strut and wiggle her ass and be sexy. Like, that's one version of Miss Fortune. Then we have Miss Fortune in the lore, who's like a badass pirate lord of Bilgewater who doesn't take shit from anyone and who can be like, use her sexual vials to blah, 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 but who's not like primarily about that, who's much more restrained in terms of her sexualization. I like both versions of the character. Like, I think League of Legends could do with a big titty sexy pirate maid who's just walking around with big red hair and being hot at everybody. And I also think League of Legends does well with, like, a badass, I'm gonna kill everyone who stands in my way and control Bilgewater Miss Fortune as a counterbalance to Gangplank. Here, they kind of seem to have wanted to split the difference a little bit, because they've certainly reined in her bust size a little bit. And they've kind of reined in the whole sexy flirtation, I'm the hottest thing in the world and you can't stop staring at me energy that she otherwise has, in favor of something that's a bit more subdued and practical in its expression, but sort of kind of trying to strike the balance between the two versions of her. And certainly they've gone with a more flirty version of her in terms of her voice lines. I don't know if anyone's heard them, but they got data mined before the game came out, and her voice lines are like basically every time a hot woman comes onto the playfield, she flirts with them, and if she faces herself in a mirror match, she tries to flirt with herself. So, like, she's thirsty, and I like that. Now, one thing we're gonna have to comment on, though, is she doesn't seem to have spleens or a liver. I'm not sure about intestines. Maybe there's room for them in there once the spleens and the liver are gone, but this, oh boy, there's not a lot of waste here. So this is this is stylization. Obviously, this is stylization. It's meant to make her look more skinny and attractive, I suppose, but it does kind of straddle the line for me, where it's like, okay, like, I get it, you're making her, like, hourglass shape, thin, like, wide hips, big booty, that, I get what you're doing, but at some point, my brain just can't help but go, but she doesn't have any organs, like, this, it's not comfortable. Something's wrong here, like, my brain just rebels against it and says, like, yeah, surely she has muscles in there somewhere, abs, with which to hold her body upright, I don't know. Back muscles, does she have them? And that's a strange line. That's like a personal preference thing for you, because for some people, this is not going to be a problem at all. They're just going to look, oh yeah, it's fine. Who cares? Because they're used to seeing those kinds of figures. For me, because I'm used to thinking about these things in terms of like, what kind of anatomy does an actual person have? It looks uncanny. Like, it looks like it's like a little too much. And there should be just a little bit of room for like something in here. Personal preference thing, I think it kind of sucks a little bit, because a lot of the characters in Legends of Runeterra are designed the same way. Like, it's not a unique thing that they're doing only for Misfortune to really hyper-emphasize the hourglass shape and make her extra sexy. It's just that, especially Six More Vodka this studio, just draws all of the ladies that they get their hands on like this, and it's kind of boring. Anyway, let's return to the composition of the image. So, once again, we're dealing with a Dutch angle, which we're going to see a lot of those, by the way. You can see the horizon. The sky is right out here. This is the horizontal line. And again, the image is tilted, but unlike with Fizz, his images where we're kind of off balance, almost as though we're falling, here, the image feels much more imbalanced, because while we are, yes, tilted compared to the horizon, we are stabilized compared to the ship itself, the thing that Misfortune is sailing on, which adds to the feeling of going through a chaotic environment but being in control of it, which of course is the feeling that they want to project with Misfortune here, is that she's hanging lazily off the side of her boat as she's cutting through the ocean waves, commanding her crew of hot ladies to do pirate stuff on the high seas. She's in control. Like, she's controlling the sea, she's cutting through the waters, she's off on an adventure. So all of that is in service of giving this feeling of Misfortune as someone who is powerful, not necessarily by dominating and taking up the frame, but powerful in the sense that she is in a chaotic environment, but she's perfectly stable. She's controlling the environment, she's commanding the ship, and she's the leader of the expedition, which is what the framing does. And this is where they do something interesting with light, because normally, like we talked about with Fizz, you'd like to have a very strong contrast between the main character that you want the people to focus on and try and sort of blur out some of the environments a little bit. Usually the way you do that is to have the thing that you want to focus on in light, just have it lit up, have a spotlight on it, and have stuff that you don't want the audience to focus on be hidden in shadow. Here, Six More Vodka Studios are doing something a little bit different and interesting. The characters in the background, like the lady up here, the lady below decks looking out, like the cannon and the ship and the stuff like that, all of this stuff is hidden not by shadow, but by glare. Like the glare of the sunlight that's hidden behind the hair of this lady up front is basically kind of creating a little fog over them that kind of washes them out and prevents their detail from taking focus away from Misfortune herself. And then they use shadow over here on the left with the girl who's backlit to make her kind of fade out a little bit. So Misfortune is not lit up as such, but she's the only one who has like a neutral contrast, who isn't in shadow, or who isn't like occluded by god rays, by rays of light or a haze of light, which is an interesting way to do the composition. That was her base. Let's move on to the... How long have we been going? Oh, good, 20 minutes, and we've been through 2 cards. Yes. I said at the front this was probably not going to be that long. I was lying, and I was wrong. So, first and most obvious thing once again, we don't have, like, it's hard to tell whether this is a Dutch angle exactly, but there's a couple of things going on. First of all, you're looking up at this mast of what seems to be Misfortune's ship based on the 2 guns insignia at the back there, which matches the 2 guns that she has on her hat. But it's as though she has knocked you down, almost. Like, it's as though you're on your back looking up, and she's just kicked your ass to the curb, and she's basically flexing on you, like doing a T-pose with guns out. Sort of in control. And again, this is the way that the framing of the image helps reinforce the dominance of the character who you want to be in control. Misfortune here is dominant both because, like, she's got the arms spread out wide, the guns, like, pretty much taking up most of the image all on her own, but also because she is above the viewer and looking down on them, specifically looking down on them, which puts her, visually speaking, in a position of power. Which I can see chat is reacting to that appropriately by saying, "Step on me, mommy." Which, yes, that is actually, that maybe not necessarily a sexual feeling, but that is the kind of feeling that you're supposed to have, is big, strong woman has kicked you on your ass, and she's in control now, not you. That's the feeling you're supposed to have from this. With an interesting addition to Misfortune being the powder monkeys here, which I haven't been 100% able to figure out, what the heck the deal with the powder monkeys are. I think they're like magic spirits that inhabit her guns and allow her to do her magic abilities with the guns, which would be an interesting retcon of her character, actually. That's unusual. I'm gonna leave it to Necrit to maybe figure out if that stuff has been teased in the lore already, because I can't remember. But that would be an interesting way to add some more mystical dimensions to the character in her relationship with Bilgewater, because up until now she has just been a lady who shoots guns real good, and it'd be nice to have some magic also mixed into that to explain how she can shoot up into the air and then bullets fall down and kill people. Let's see, what else? Right, Misfortune's posture is an interesting action line, because usually when you have a character who's like dominant in a frame, who's looming over someone, it's, like, unusual to have them also lean and tilt. But in this instance, I think it's supposed to communicate the idea that you're standing on, like, the swaying deck of a ship, and gravity, like, your center of gravity is shifting all the time, left and right, as the ship is tossed about in the waves, and she's keeping her balance by leaning into it as she's got her guns out, firing at people who, fortunately for the viewer, aren't you, even as she's clearly flirting with whoever she just knocked down. I mean, look at that face. Anything else interesting in this image? No, well, except that the composition is a lot more chaotic compared to the previous composition, which is very, like, there's lots of action going on here, but it's also pretty stable. Like, you've got the ship stabilizing the image, you've got Misfortune hanging off the ship, the horizon line in the background. This one here is way more chaotic because you got stuff and shrapnel and boom, and the fire flying everywhere. So this is clearly in the middle of a combat scene. And so the feeling of rootless chaos, I guess, works pretty well for the scene. But it was... I used this for the thumbnail for the thing, and it was actually kind of hard to edit into a thumbnail because I kept having to move it around to make it look better composed, in order to fit, like, the stale energy of a thumbnail rather than the madness of a combat scene. Okay, let me check in. Holy shit, what the fuck are the 900 people here? What the hell? It was 300 like 10 minutes ago. Hello, hi, welcome. I'm looking at all the cards in Legends of Runeterra. Hello, I hope you'll enjoy it. Right, where were we? Twisted Fate, that's the one we're looking at right now. So again, we've talked about some of this before, but we'll mention this a million times before we're over. Twisted Fate is in a frame in the image, and he's being framed by a couple of things. First, there's the table, which is sort of our baseline. We've got a Dutch angle. Again, you can see that the horizon line is not stable, but it's not as extreme of a Dutch angle as we've got in other pictures. Then Twisted Fate is boxed in. He's boxed in between the pirate dude on the left and the pirate dude slash biker gang guy from the 80s over here on the right, both of whom are like creating a little enclosed space for Twisted Fate to be in. Now, when you do that compositionally, like when you box one character in between other characters, that's a really good way to make a character feel trapped, like they're caught, like they are unable to escape from whatever is chasing them or whatever is cornering them. But that's not the mood that you get from Twisted Fate. Twisted Fate is in control. He's calm, he's relaxed, his posture tells us so. He's throwing his magical cards around, he's smiling, he's not even looking out at us, looking up. He's looking down because he's confident, and his posture tells us the same. Like, shoulders wide, arms out, arms spread out, which is what you, like, in 80s business manuals would see called a power pose. But that's what it is. Like, he's showing us visually that he's in control of the space, that he's in control of what's happening, even though, like, he's in a tense situation where if these guys get mad at him, it doesn't look like he has anywhere to escape to, because behind him there is wall, and to the left and right of him there are big pirates with hook hands and tattoos and biker vests. Twisted Fate teaches pirates to play Uno. Yeah. Man, I would kill for a set of Uno cards, but with Twisted Fate images on it. I'd kill for that. Riot, get on that. Get on that immediately. And then there's light. Remember how in the Misfortune base splash, we talked about how light can be used to highlight a character and make them the center of attention in the image? Well, that's exactly what's happening here. We've got the candle down here, first of all, and then we've got the magic light of Twisted Fate's magic cards, which he's definitely not cheating with. Casting this golden soft light over the character himself, which puts him in contrast. Like, all of Twisted Fate's colors are, right, like, of a warm variety. You can see, like, the mossy red pinkness of his skin, the brown of his leather coat, the red of his vest, and, like, all the highly saturated colors of his cards and his hands. Puts him in contrast with the background environment, where you can see it's much more bluish, blue, gray, brown, very muted, very unsaturated, fading into the background compared to him. And the same thing is happening with the other guys. You can see that the light is also playing on them a little bit. Like, it's lighting them up a little bit, the light of Twisted Fate's magic playing on their skin, but most of them is in shadow. Like, most of their bodies is in shadow, and therefore, like, visually speaking, less important, and also less highlighted than Twisted Fate himself. So just by using the composition to create a frame and using the light to highlight the character and then, like, creating color contrast, you can draw the eye completely naturally to exactly the subject that you want to look at. And if you done it another way around, say that Twisted Fate had been in shadow, and this guy had been lit up, and, like, it was Twisted Fate and this guy who was sort of looking at him, boxing him in, even though he's, like, way out here in the composition, way out on the left, you can use those same techniques to highlight a different part of the image if that's what you want, if you want a composition that does that. Because it's so powerful, just light and color and like a little bit of framing, and you can draw a viewer's eye absolutely anywhere you want. I need something to drink. Right. I think someone in chat, when is someone gonna hire you for, like, a mobile game or something? I don't know what I would bring, because, like, I'm not a good enough illustrator to draw like this. Like, they need illustrators who can draw this stuff, not just a guy who can sit around and talk about it. Anyway, where were we? Twisted Fate. Here he is, leveled up. And again, the frame is right there. You have the arched doorway here at the back that creates this circular space, this rounded space, this frame for Twisted Fate to fit himself into. But here you also have a different feeling. Like, now the Twisted Fate is setting up the sting. Like, he's setting up the gamble, the con that he's running. And he's under pressure. Like, these guys are watching him carefully. If something goes wrong, they'll be on him. So he's, like, so there's this feeling he's in control, but he's also, like, there's also this slight sensation of he's a little bit trapped in the image. See the contrast with the leveled up version. Here, no one is trapping Twisted Fate. Everyone is basically behind him, staring at him like in rapt awe. Like, what the hell? How did he do the whatever magic thing he just did? And here, Twisted Fate, rather than being enclosed by the frame that's used to highlight him in the image, he's breaking out of it. Like, he's literally extending his hand out of the frame itself and presenting his magic cards, which I'll never get tired of calling that magic cards, even though it should be magic cards. Because I like to imagine that Twisted Fate would be really into magic if he lived in the modern world and he'd just win all the time. Like, just always top-decking exactly the right thing and no one can prove he's cheating. But here he's breaking out of that frame, completely in control of the entire scene just by taking up most of it. And again, same techniques with lighting being used. Rather than the light of his magic, though, he's being lit from above by something that kind of looks like sunlight, but presumably couldn't be? Who knows? But he's lit up, and his colors are generally very bright, and everyone and everything else is in shade and in darkness, so that none of it draws too much attention. And the only things that we actually sort of have our attention drawn to a little bit are people who are like, "Whoa, how did he do the magic thing?" Who are astonished by him. All of which, like, just highlights the sense of this guy having the power, being in control, being the best in the room at what he does. I do like the old man in the background over here. I wish I could zoom in on him more, but I do like... He's such a Renaissance painting character to me. If you look at a picture like Caravaggio's The Card Sharks, you'll find characters like this showing up in it with the little half glasses and kind of balding with cards in hand, old card sharks. Who infest the taverna of like Renaissance Rome and things like that. He's just a nice little character design. I also wish I could get a better look at that lady back there, because she seems to have a really interesting face. But I'll have to find the high-resolution card art later and have a look at it. Okay. These are... Yeah, so there's not much to say generally about spell cards. So unless there's like some unusual reason to do it, we're not going to bother taking a look at it, because they're basically just icons. Like, no characters, there's nothing artistically that interesting to talk about in them, I think. Right, let me have a look at chat so that, like, I don't... In case you guys are saying something, I'm not completely ignorant of it. No, it seems to be good. Cool. So, this character right here, we're talking about Gangplank, but take a notice of this character right here and this one right here, because I think both of them show up on other cards elsewhere in the set. I know this guy does. He's an orange courier kind of character. Anyway, Gangplank. So, here the framing is a little bit different, because there kind of isn't really one. There's a couple of things going on. We have, of course, like the railing of the ship where he's stamping on some aristocrat's hands and throwing him into the water to be consumed. That's happening. But outside of that, like, unlike with Fizz or Misfortune or Twisted Fate, there's not a clear frame in the background that sort of, that highlights Gangplank. Instead, what we have is a series of converging lines. Take a look at the sails here, the big black sails, and the railings coming off of the mast here. Take a look at, like, the general directionality that all of this stuff is pointing to. All of it kind of creates this swoop that leads us down, like, that leads the eye to focus on these things as areas. And the same thing here with the lines coming off in the background here. There's a lot of stuff that sort of just gently points you towards Gangplank. Like, if your eye catches here, it'll follow the line down, and then, oh, there he is. And if your eye catches up here, then you get drawn down the line and over there. So it's like a very basic compositional technique that you'll see everywhere in classical painting. But that's just being used to draw your eye to Gangplank. Then there's the second part, which is the black sails. Like, the sails are matte black, and they are in the background, so they're even, like, their color, or rather their contrast is even more washed out. And Gangplank himself is highlighted with bright sunlight, shining off his pauldrons, shining off his... I'm not sure if this is his post-Burning Tides robot arm, necessarily. I think it probably is, because Gangplank has some voice lines that... reference the Burning Tides thing, but I thought he lost his whole arm and not just the bit from the elbow up. But yeah, this is very matte and sort of subdued, but then Gangplank himself, all this golden light, all these shining, like the bright orange, and like the light coming off the side of his head, and the gold on his shoulder, his brass shoulder plate, all of that creates this brilliant contrast against this matte black background that, again, helps highlight him as a character. And even though the other characters in the background, you can see the sunlight is hitting them directly. Like, they're getting the same sunlight that Gangplank is, but it's not shining quite as brightly off them, is it? It's not highlighting them quite as brightly. There's none of these almost sheer white highlights going on them, which is a way that you can have the characters be lit in different ways, but still occupy exactly the same scene and the same lighting conditions, and use that for the composition. And I think that's quite good. I also like that the orange is so highly contrasted. Like having the orange here is clearly an important part of the character, and they want to be sure that it's one of the first things that you see when you really look at Gangplank, is this bright glowing orange that he's taken a bite out of without even peeling it. The madman! This is a dangerous man who must be respected because he doesn't peel his oranges before he eats them. Which is lovely. Anything else? Well, I mean, this is just a really gorgeous illustration, generally. If you're a digital painter, and you're working on your craft, you're trying to figure out how to get into digital painting, one thing to take a look at is the way that effort is concentrated in all of these splash art, because these are brilliant and, like, impressive, and this looks like a gorgeous, huge ship, and look at all that detail in the rigging and stuff, but if you take this image and you really zoom in on stuff like the roof back here, or the crow's nest, or the ropes, or even the rigging back here, all of these things that look from a distance like really impressive detail, when you zoom in on it, what you see is that it's just smears. Like, it's really rough painting. It's very smeary. It's not a lot of detail. It's not like a lot of time has been spent on getting all the texturing right. No. It's like you use a flat paintbrush and you just smear that shit on there, because you are using these compositional techniques to draw people's eyes to the characters and to this stuff right here. You spend all of your time detailing that, like all of the little flecks and like the iridescent... The ironing? What the hell is that called in English? But the green detail on Gangplank's brass shoulder plate and his boots and the little scuffs of dirt and stuff. And here on the side, it's like stuff that's not that important, but it's just kind of nice to have. Just paint that, smear that on there. It's not that important to get all of it right. And that's... Once you start looking for those kinds of details, you'll see that everywhere in modern concept art, in gaming, is like artists know that, like, I don't need to spend 2.5 hours filling out all the details out here. It doesn't matter. It's a waste of time and effort. We focus our effort where it matters, and then we kind of phase out the details as we get further and further away from anything that's interesting to look at. Almost like an LOD in real life. And that's an important discipline to learn if you're going into art in any commercial industry, is to know where to put your effort. Like, to put your effort where it make an impact. And, like, if you can just fudge the rest of it, it's fine. Like, it doesn't matter. It's fine. Anyway, here we have a much more obvious and explicit framing. The railing, the rope, the sail, the rope. We have this perfect little trapezoid frame around the upgraded Gangplank, leveled up Gangplank, creating... Like, again, this space of interest, this is where our eye is immediately drawn. Looking at him right here, where he's supposed to be. And then everything else out on the sides, there's, like, it's nice it's there, it's nice it's detailed, but here is where our attention is drawn. And this is an interesting way to create power and malice in a character. Because look at the difference between the two pictures. Here... Gangplank is powerful because, again, he's towering above us, he's looking down at... Like, we have the perspective of the aristocrat who's hanging off the railing, basically. He's powerful because we're looking up at him. He's surrounded by his powerful crew and his big ship with a big mast. Like, this is why he's powerful, all of this stuff that frames him. Here, it's a very different feeling. There's no crew to back him up. There's no one helping him. He doesn't have a grand, imposing mountain of a ship in the background. You are not below his eye level. He's staring you straight in the eye, like he's looking you right in the face. The reason why he's fucking terrifying is because you see what's behind him, and that's... Oh, that's a lot of barrels of... Uh-oh, those barrels have fuses on them. Oh dear. This is a man who's like, yeah, I have 12 tons of dynamite right behind me, and it might go off in a second, and I don't give a fuck. Because cool guys don't look at explosions. And that's what makes him menacing and powerful and dangerous here. Not that he's surrounded by all the trappings and fineries of a pirate lord, but because here is a man who is willing to go to that length, who is willing to do that if it gets him something that he wants. Which is the storytelling of the image, like barrels and barrels of gunpowder, and Gangplank looking at you in no uncertain terms and saying, "Do you want to go down with a ship, lad?" Which is very, like, in terms of visual storytelling, is very, very effective to me. Like, make him terrifying just as a person on his own, rather than as a pirate lord. That works like gangbusters. I also like the use of explosions here in the background to kind of create this almost like you're in hell. It's like you're sailing on a ship in a lake of fire in the depths of hell itself, with Gangplank as your captain right there. As visual storytelling goes, really very good. Let's see, there's the powder keg. Not a lot to say about it, except that, again, highlight with sunlight, basically, but contrasted against these dark, stormy skies to underscore the menace and danger of what he's about to do. Gangplank's sigil on the barrel itself, but Misfortune's symbol on the sails of the ship that these barrels are clearly trying to torpedo. Which I think is, like, it's a nice little composition, but most of the composition is just kind of taken up by water. This is something that Fizz's level 2 splash art avoided by having that very strong Dutch angle so that the water would only eat a corner of the image. Here, it's like more, no, this is about these things are floating in the sea, so the ocean is allowed to take up pretty much half of the picture. Whew. So that's 4 cards, and we've been going for 40 minutes. So it'll be a while. Okay. Moving on to Nautilus. So, a lot of the same things going on that we've already talked about, using light to contrast him against a much more drab and dark background, but we're also dealing with a very different kind of environment here, where all of the previous characters we've been dealt with, all of them have been above water. Nautilus, on the other hand, is very much about the deep. Like, that's his storytelling. That's what he's about. That's what his deck is about, is to get to the state of the deep, and then all of your cards just get stupid powerful. I'm excited to try this out, by the way. That's very much like the Nautilus thing. So you have to have a different mood set up here, and I feel like the darkness down here could be even more oppressive, honestly. Like, I feel like the background is maybe even too bright. Like, I feel like those tentacles and claws and God knows what else is popping out of the deep down here would have been more frightening if it had been even darker and you could just barely see a hint of them. Like, you couldn't see them clearly, but you just kind of barely got a sense that there's something down here bigger than hammerhead sharks and great whites grasping up towards the surface. It's also a matter of readability, though. Like, when you create art like this for a game like this, it has to be visible on all kinds of screens. Like, you have to be able to look at it on a phone screen, now that the game is coming out on mobile. You have to be able to look at it on my relatively high-quality BenQ monitors, and you have to be able to look at it at some shitty little, like, $20 monitor from some no-name brand off Amazon that doesn't have any color fidelity whatsoever. And so sometimes you'll see artists trying to avoid too much darkness, because this is something Tom Scott did a video on recently, but basically the way that color is done on modern 16 and 32-bit monitors, there's fewer colors available the darker a color gets, and the absolute difference in luminosity and lighting becomes way more obvious. So if you go too dark with your colors, you can see some really ugly color banding that can be kind of hard to compress your way around when you compress images for viewing on multiple devices and screens. And that's also part of the discipline of creating art for video games and for digital media, is to know that sometimes you have to sacrifice a good compositional idea for the sake of clarity, which I think is maybe part of what's happening here, because I'm seeing a lot of color banding going on, actually, especially out here on the tentacles, which tells me that this picture was probably darker previously, and then they had to brighten it because it wasn't readable on all the devices they wanted to read it on. That's possible. It could be that it was just designed like this, but I can see some really strong color banding in the compression here, so I think that might be the case, actually. Right, scale. Here's another thing. Another way to make a character seem powerful and dangerous is to make them big, just to make them large in relationship to their environment. Look at Nautilus next to this shark that's swimming in front of him. See, because the shark's in the background here. It's like, oh yeah, but maybe they're just far away, right? But no, this one is swimming there, like, in front of his anchor. And so it becomes clear that, oh, motherfucker, this man is a literal walking mountain. This is like 100 brick shithouses got together, had an orgy, and the baby that came out was that. And I think if another shark had kind of swum in front of him, that might have strengthened that impression a little bit. But as it is, it kind of works really well that, oh yeah, it's just a normal-sized guy in a diving suit. Hang on, wait, what's that? Oh no! Oh no, he's large! But yeah, here's by the way, one of the first pictures we've had without a Dutch angle. Look at that, the horizon line is flat below down here, which has been rare so far. Oh, and again, color contrast. Nautilus's yellow eyes contrast nicely with, like, the green that's animating him in his suit, and contrast nicely with the dark environment, which, again, draws your eyes to this space right here because the lighting is there to draw your eye. And here, again, scale. That's a ship. That's a ship's mast coming out of the water right there. So when that guy rises above the waves, shaking hands with what seems to be a pretty decent-sized octopus, all things considered, he looks large. He looks like a big boy. He looks like a ton of everything. So, framing again, here's something interesting going on. Nautilus is so big, essentially, here, that he kind of creates a frame for himself a little bit. Like, look at the shape of like, the anchor and the arms, all kind of pointing into this bulging wedge shape, which also helps emphasize the idea that he's rising out of the ocean. This is where I really wish I could draw with a highlighter over top of the things, but, like, imagine a shape like that. If you kind of drew a line loosely around the outside of his body, you'd get this wedge shape that pushes upwards. Almost like something, like when something is breaking through the surface of the water, you know how you get that, like that bulge in the water as something, like, is ready to burst out of it? He's kind of emulating that. Like, imagine, for example, if he had his arms raised, or his arms out wide, or if he had a different pose, then you would get a very different feeling. But here, it feels a lot more like, oh, this thing has just burst out of the water and now everyone is fucked. Like, you have reached the deep, and now Nautilus is coming for you. And that's, like, a very effective little bit of compositional, where it's like, you don't need anything else to frame him. He's just big enough that you can't look at anything else. I love the details on the anchor, by the way. His anchor is really cool. Who made that rope, by the way? Like, who made a rope that was that big? Someone had to make that. Like, the anchor I can kind of, yeah, maybe for a really big ship, but the rope, how do you weave that? Magic, I guess. Again, using lighting, like, again, the bright yellow light on Nautilus's eyes contrasts with the bluish nature of the background environment. The same thing goes for the green that animates his body in there. Creates a color contrast with the rest of the environment, which draws your attention and your eye. That was the champions of Bilgewater. And now let's just say units, so that we don't get the spells. So here, Crackshot Corsair, or as I like to call her, Captain Amelie from Treasure Planet when she was a child. Again, there's some simple framing going on here. You can see kind of how the sails and the rope creates this little room for her in the image for her to be in as she's hanging out on the rope up here. And by the way, Riot, what the fuck is the deal with Yordles? Like, are the Yordles like these tiny little invisible magic cryptids that nobody knows about? Or are they just like normal things that walk around everywhere and hang out with people? Because that's kind of what it seems in Legends of Runeterra, is that they're just like, they just hang out with people. They're just there and everyone's fine with it. But in the lore, the Yordles are like, holy shit, was that a Yordle? That can't be true. Yordles aren't real. Heck if I know. Laurie Goulding, the editor, the narrative editor-in-chief of League of Legends, did say on Twitter that the thing they're working with right now is the idea that if you are inclined to feel positively towards Yordles, then you can see them as they are. But if you are inclined to hate Yordles, or you're afraid of magical things or magic, or afraid of Yordles, then they have an inbuilt natural magic defense that will make them appear to just be small humans, or some other small creature that you'll go, oh, that's not a Yordle, so I'm not going to be shitty to it. Which, okay, but seriously, you have to clarify this at some point. Anyway, she's just kind of fun. There's not that much to say about her outside of the framing, I think. Like, you can see the lighting is being used again to highlight her, as opposed to the powder monkey that's empowering her gun, I think. I do have a complaint about, as I said, I'll have plenty of complaints. I do have a complaint that her face is so human. Like, I feel like Yordles are animal creatures, like, they're little furries, basically. And looking at someone like Heimerdinger or Rumble, I feel like if you're gonna make her face this fuzzy peach fur thing, then you should go harder on it. The sexual dimorphism thing with the Yordles is kind of bugs me sometimes because it's so inconsistent. Anything else to talk about here? I like the colors. Like, I like that there's lots of pink and red and orange being used in the image here, like to make the sails really stand out against the blue of the sky, and also having the clouds be lit up so that it kind of looks like you're looking at her at sunset, basically. Creating some nice color contrasts in the image itself, and also kind of creates a visual affinity between the sails and the clouds, as though the sails themselves are like clouds on the horizon on a pirate ship, which is like interesting imagery. Not sure they do anything with it, but whatever. Then there's the minions. League of Legends has minions now. We're all fucking doomed. They have minions. So these guys are actually pretty cool. What was it they were called? Dreg Dredgers. So there's a couple of cool things going on with their character designs here. I really like that they don't have eyes, but the marine creatures that are attached to their heads have eyes. So this guy has like a thing that looks like some kind of... It looks like a pirate hat, but it also kind of looks like a squid attached to his head, and that's the thing that has the eye that pokes out. And the guy back here literally just has a normal squid on his head, and that's the thing that has eyes, kind of screaming at things, and this guy has a fish. I think that's really cool. That's a really cool way to create a little sea gremlin of some kind, whatever the hell these things are. They're not Yordles, that's for sure. There's some kind of sea gremlin or whatever. But that's a really nice way to give them this maritime creature design. Almost a little bit Pirates of the Caribbean, like the pirates on Davy Jones' ship. Kind of the same idea of merging stuff that looks humanoid with stuff that looks decidedly more fishy. One thing I do want to criticize about this image is that it's not really clear on a first viewing that this guy is fishing. Like, he's got a fishing rod, he's pulling it back, he's having a great time, everyone else is terrified of whatever the hell he's just pulled out. And then the fishing rod, like, bends, really bends in a cartoonish way into the frame. I feel like that's a little bit unclear. Like, I feel like you could probably have pulled the camera back a little bit and shown a bit more of the fishing rod to really make it clear that that's what he's doing. Because certainly when I look at him here, it's like, oh, it's a fishing, oh, it's a fishing rod. Yeah, okay, I got it now, it's a fishing rod, that's what it is. Which is a little bit of a pity, because that it's more funny when you know that they're terrified of whatever this mad lad has just pulled up out of the ocean. This picture is by Alex Heath, by the way. I think that's the first illustrator who wasn't Six More Vodka that we've seen so far. But I think Alex Heath, if I'm not mistaken, is one of the internal artists at Riot themselves. I think. Because I know some of them are also like outside contractors who were brought in specifically to work on the game. And you can kind of see that there's... Well, I don't know if you can see it, but I can see there's a little bit of a difference in his painting style compared to the art that's done by Six More Vodka. He's got a little bit more of a flat-shaded, cartoony style than they do in some ways, and a little bit more of an oil painty aesthetic going on the skin of his characters than the rest of the pictures. Like, especially on the hat, you can see this oil painty kind of rough texture that comes out of it, almost as though he's been using like a special brush or something. Which makes it look a little bit different than, like, this stuff right here is, like, way cleaner. Six More Vodka's art tends to be much more sharp in a lot of its definition. Anyway, that's a completely irrelevant observation. So here we have our first little callback. I believe this guy is in Gangplank's artwork. Yeah, there he is. Ish. Is that the same guy? No, it's not. Well, it is. It has to be, but I guess he... No, it's not. It's not the same guy. He doesn't have the same... Okay. Just similar tattoos. Well, yeah, here... There's not that much interesting stuff to talk about with a Jagged Butcher, I think. He's not a very interesting composition as such. Like, they're using the mast and, like, the lines of the sails to kind of bound him in here so that he has a place to stand. He's a cool character design. Like, I like having fat characters in games that aren't just, like, ridiculous comedy jokes or whatever, but which actually have some menace to them. Because that's kind of disturbingly rare when you get right down to it. But outside of that, not a lot of interesting stuff to say about him. He's not really the center of any narrative in his image. He's just kind of holding this thing out and being, I'm a pirate! I have a hook! It's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with it, but it is just one of those that's just like a card without a lot of super interesting stuff to comment on. On the other hand, though, someone asked me what my favorite card in the new Legends of Runeterra update is. There you go. There's my favorite card. He's the best one. I will not be taking any arguments. I will not be taking any questions. He's the best one, and if you disagree, you're wrong, and I'm going to prove it to you. Evidence number 1, he's a Poro. If you want more evidence, then you're wrong. Anyway... the Plunder Poro. His Spectre's been on the bounty board longer than most, for he's a greedy, ruthless devil that won't let anyone or anything stand in his way. Worst of all, he's cute, damn it! Gangplank. So, little bit of Easter eggs in the background. We've got a wanted poster for Graves here, I believe. We've got one, I think, for Misfortune over here. And then we have the coolest, most badass one of all, which is for Pirate Poro, Plunder Poro, hanging right behind him. Because Plunder Poro gives no fucks. Plunder Poro is not afraid of bounty hunters. Plunder Poro will take your shit down if you come for him. He will sit in front of his own wanted poster on a pile of gold, and if you try to fuck with him, Plunder Poro will fuck you right back, because Plunder Poro is the biggest badass in Bilgewater. Gangplank steers clear. He's so good. I just love the idea of having a Poro who's so big and fluffy that, it turns into a big pirate beard. He's adorable. So a little bit of framing and composition going on here. He's sitting on top of this chest right here. And so all of this stuff right here, that becomes part of his foreground, and everything else becomes background to that, which is what helps him stand out in the middle of the picture, along with the stuff we already talked about, like the sunlight on his gun and his hat, highlighting him, making him clearly the center of the image, the shadow falling, relatively speaking, on the rest of the image, and just the fact that he's surrounded by evidence of his power and wealth and general badassery, in the shape of money, in this case, and treasure chests, and a wanted poster that he's sitting right in front of, because fuck you, that's why. Plunder Poro is good. I don't know if I'm going to make a Bilgewater Freljord deck specifically for him, but I fucking might. I need to drink something.